What began as a wedding celebration in Riverdale ended with a bride dead and a groom vanished. Lucia Valentini, 23, and Julian Westbrook, 52, seemed happy just hours before tragedy struck. Their wedding photos show a beaming bride in white lace and a proud groom with his hand firmly on her waist. By morning, those same hands would end her life, leaving behind questions that would haunt a community for years to come. A hidden past and deep-seated trauma would collide with deadly consequences on what should have been the happiest night of their lives. As investigators would later discover, behind the facade of this May-December romance lay a web of deception, obsession, and unhealed wounds that created the perfect storm for violence. Riverdale sits nestled between rolling hills and the winding Cedar River, a town of 35,000 where church steeples still dominate the skyline. While new developments and chain stores have crept in over the years, many residents pride themselves on maintaining traditional values. Multi-generational families attend the same churches their grandparents did. Community events revolve around faith, family, and football. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do. In Riverdale, your reputation isn't just yours. It belongs to your whole family, explained Sheriff Michael Davies, who would lead the investigation. People remember mistakes for generations. Julian Westbrook had built his construction company from the ground up after arriving in Riverdale 20 years earlier. A hard-working man with calloused hands and a stern demeanor, he was respected in business circles but rarely socialized beyond his church community. His office walls displayed both construction awards and Bible verses. Employees described him as fair but intensely private, a man who expected perfection in every nail hammered and board cut. Julian always had these rigid ideas about right and wrong, said Thomas Green, his longtime foreman. There was never any gray area with him. Either you were living right or you weren't. What most people in Riverdale didn't know was how Julian's religious convictions had calcified into something darker after his first marriage imploded. 15 years into what appeared to be a stable union, his wife Rebecca left him for his former business partner. The double betrayal shattered Julian's world and transformed his traditional religious values into something more obsessive. After Rebecca left, he went deeper into church, his cousin Martha revealed. But it wasn't just about faith anymore. He became fixated on loyalty, on purity. He'd talk for hours about how women today lacked virtue, how you couldn't trust them. In the years that followed, Julian rarely dated. When he did, relationships ended abruptly if he sensed any hint of a woman's past. His son Aaron, now 27, had sided with his mother after the divorce, creating another wound Julian carried silently. They hadn't spoken in 8 years. Lucia Valentini grew up just 6 blocks from Riverdale's town square. Her Italian-American family ran a small bakery, where Lucia helped after school, dusted in flour and dreaming of bigger things. A bright student with a warm smile, she'd managed to attend community college while helping her family, earning an associate's degree in business administration. Like many young women in Riverdale, Lucia had dated her high school boyfriend through her first year of college before they drifted apart. What Julian never knew, what Lucia made sure he never discovered, was that this wasn't her only relationship. During her second year of college, Lucia had fallen deeply in love with her literature professor's teaching assistant, a relationship that lasted nearly 2 years. When it ended amicably, Lucia returned to Riverdale with experiences she knew would be judged harshly in her traditional community. She wasn't ashamed of her past, her roommate Jenna said later. But she knew how people talked in Riverdale. When she started working for Julian, she decided it was easier to let people believe what they wanted to believe. Lucia began working as a receptionist at Westbrook Construction when the previous office manager retired. Julian noticed her efficiency, her politeness with difficult clients, and her respectful manner. But most of all, he noticed her youth, her apparent innocence. To Julian, she seemed untouched by the modern world he despised. He would comment on how Lucia wasn't like other young women, recalled office accountant Meredith Stevens. He'd say things like, "She hasn't been corrupted yet," or "She still has traditional values." It was uncomfortable, but we never imagined where it would lead. Their relationship progressed slowly, beginning with Julian asking Lucia to stay late to organize files, then offering rides home, then inviting her to church. Lucia, raised to respect authority and seeing potential stability with an established business owner, accepted his attention. When Julian proposed after 8 months, she said yes, ignoring her parents' concerned glances. Antonio and Maria Valentini had reservations about the match that went beyond the 29-year age gap. There was something in his eyes we didn't trust, Maria would later tell investigators. Too intense. But Lucia insisted he was kind to her, that he would provide a good life. The wedding took place at St. Augustine's Catholic Church on a crisp October morning. Photographs show Lucia in a modest lace gown with a high neckline, Julian in a dark suit, his face solemn even as he smiled. The reception at the church hall was alcohol-free at Julian's insistence, with separate tables for men and women, another of Julian's traditional preferences. When Julian rose to make his toast, his words seemed romantic to some, troubling to others. "Today, God has blessed me with what every man hopes for, a pure woman to build a life with," he said, raising his glass of sparkling cider. "In Lucia, I found someone uncorrupted by this world, a woman of virtue who will be a godly wife." Lucia's smile never wavered, though her college friend Jenna noticed her knuckles whitening around her glass. As the afternoon faded into evening, the newlyweds departed for Julian's renovated Victorian home on Maple Street, where they would spend their first night together before leaving for a honeymoon in Gatlinburg. No one who waved goodbye to the couple could have imagined that by sunrise, Lucia would be dead, and Julian would be driving across state lines, a man consumed by rage and betrayal, a murderer fleeing the shattered remains of his illusions. Modest finances, but Julian insisted on paying for everything. "A proper wedding reflects on the man," he told her. The ceremony was traditional and solemn, with the elderly Father Moretti emphasizing the wife's duty to submit and the husband's duty to protect. The reception at the church hall maintained the formal atmosphere. No dancing was permitted at Julian's request, just a catered dinner and carefully scripted toasts. Julian sat stiffly beside his new bride, his hand often resting possessively on her arm. Guests later recalled how he watched Lucia's every move, his eyes narrowing whenever male guests approached to congratulate her. During a quiet moment, Julian spoke with his only friend at the gathering, fellow church elder Robert Simmons. Security camera footage later recovered from the hall captured their conversation in a corner, away from other guests. "You know why my first marriage failed, don't you?" Julian leaned close to Robert. "Rebecca wasn't pure when I married her. She'd been with others before me. Once a woman has given herself away, she'll do it again. That's what happened. But Lucia," his expression softened momentarily, "Lucia is different. Untouched. God has given me another chance with a pure vessel." Robert's uncomfortable nod was the last interaction Julian had before collecting Lucia for their departure. As they left the hall, rice falling around them, Julian's grip on Lucia's waist tightened visibly. Her smile, bright for the cameras, didn't reach her eyes. The Victorian home on Maple Street was Julian's pride, every detail meticulously restored. He carried Lucia across the threshold as tradition dictated, setting her down carefully in the foyer where a cross hung prominently above an antique table. Upstairs, the master bedroom had been prepared with fresh linens, a Bible placed on each nightstand. "I've waited for this night," Julian told Lucia as she emerged from the bathroom in a modest white nightgown her mother had helped her select. "The moment when two become one flesh, as God intended." What Julian didn't say, but what investigators would later piece together through his journal entries and statements to his pastor, was his explicit expectation for their wedding night. Julian believed firmly in the physical evidence of virginity, blood on the sheets that would prove Lucia's purity and, by extension, her worthiness as his wife. As the night progressed, Julian's demeanor changed. The absence of what he considered proof began to gnaw at him. His suspicion grew with each passing moment, his mind racing back to Rebecca, to betrayal, to shame. "You've lied to me," he finally said, his voice deadly quiet as they lay in the darkness. "There should have been blood." Lucia froze. For months she had dreaded this moment, had convinced herself that somehow it wouldn't matter, that his love would overcome his obsession. "Julian, please," she whispered. "That's not how it works. Not all women. Don't lie to me." His shout echoed through the house. "You've been with someone else. Haven't you? Haven't you?" Neighbors would later report hearing raised voices but thought nothing of it. Just newlyweds having their first argument. None could have guessed the terror unfolding inside. Cornered and afraid, Lucia finally confessed to her relationship in college. She tried to explain that it didn't change who she was, that she still loved Julian, still respected him. But with each word, she could see him slipping further away, his features hardening into something unrecognizable. "Just like Rebecca," he muttered, pacing the bedroom. "Deceiving me. Making a fool of me." His voice rose again. "Do you know what people will think? That I couldn't tell? That I married a woman who had given herself to another man?" As Lucia tried to approach him, to calm him, Julian's rage exploded. "You're unclean," he shouted. "Damaged. You tricked me into marrying a whore." What happened next was pieced together from the crime scene and Julian's eventual confession. In a fury that blended present betrayal with past trauma, Julian grabbed Lucia by the throat. Her desperate struggles, evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and arms, couldn't overcome his strength. As she gasped for air, Julian saw not just Lucia but every woman who had deceived him. Every lie he believed had been told to him. Medical examiner Dr. Sarah Chen would later testify that strangulation takes significant time and sustained pressure. Time during which Julian could have stopped, could have released his grip, could have chosen differently. He didn't. When Lucia's body went limp, Julian didn't immediately flee. Crime scene evidence showed he sat beside her body for hours, writing frantically in a journal that police would later recover. "God has tested me and found me wanting," he wrote. "The deceiver has been punished but my soul is in peril." At 8:17 the next morning, Julian's sister Catherine arrived with breakfast pastries to congratulate the newlyweds. Using the spare key Julian had given her years ago, she entered when repeated knocking went unanswered. Her screams brought neighbors running. Police reports described the scene in clinical detail. Lucia Valentini Westbrook, deceased, lying on the bed in a white nightgown, pronounced ligature marks on her neck consistent with manual strangulation. The room showed signs of a struggle, a knocked-over lamp, a water glass shattered on the hardwood floor. On the nightstand, Julian's wedding band had been deliberately placed atop their marriage certificate. Catherine, through shocked sobs, provided critical information to the first responders. Julian owned a remote hunting cabin near the state line. He kept it stocked with supplies. And most concerning, he stored a handgun there. As police secured the crime scene, officers discovered Julian's truck was missing from the garage. His hunting equipment, normally stored in precise order on garage shelves, was gone as well. The manhunt for Julian Westbrook began as Lucia's body was carefully removed from the home that should have been the start of her new life, not the end of it. Detective Lisa Morgan arrived at the Westbrook home by 9:30 a.m., taking charge of what would quickly become the most high-profile case in Riverdale's recent history. The victim's body, the wedding night timing, and the groom's disappearance created a perfect storm for media attention. "Our first priority was understanding what happened in that bedroom," Detective Morgan explained. "Witness statements from the wedding gave us a picture of Julian's state of mind heading into that night. 3 guests independently reported Julian's tense demeanor at the reception, particularly his reaction when Lucia's college roommate Jenna mentioned their wild times in the dorm. Though Jenna later clarified she meant late-night study sessions, Julian's tight-lipped response had been noticed by several attendees. Medical examiner Dr. Sarah Chen confirmed what detectives suspected from Julian's journals. There were indications Mr. Westbrook was expecting physical proof of virginity, she testified. This expectation is medically unfounded, as hymenal tissue varies widely among women and can be altered by many activities besides sexual intercourse. The investigation expanded to Julian's church community, where Detective Morgan encountered a wall of initial silence. Eventually, church elder Robert Simmons came forward with disturbing information. Julian became fixated on female purity after his divorce, Simmons revealed. He even started a men's prayer group focused on finding godly wives. During these meetings, he would distribute literature about identifying morally compromised women through various tests. As the investigation deepened, detectives contacted Julian's ex-wife Rebecca, now living in Colorado. Her testimony provided crucial insight into Julian's psychological decline. It started with small things, Rebecca explained in her recorded statement. Questioning where I'd been. Checking my phone. Then he began accusing me of having affairs before our marriage. He would demand I confess my past sins, saying he could sense I was hiding something. Rebecca described how Julian's paranoia escalated over their final years together. He became obsessed with the idea that I wasn't a virgin when we married, though we'd met in high school. He said my impurity was poisoning our marriage. When I finally left, it wasn't for another man like he claims. I left because I feared for my safety. Background checks revealed a pattern of controlling behavior. 2 years before meeting Lucia, Julian had filed for a restraining order against a woman he briefly dated, claiming she was stalking him. The woman's counterfiling painted a different picture. Julian monitoring her movements and demanding access to her social media accounts to verify her moral character. 5 days into the investigation, a crucial discovery was made at Lucia's apartment. Her roommate granted police access to a locked drawer containing Lucia's personal journal. The entries painted a heartbreaking picture of a young woman increasingly troubled by her fiancé's behavior. Julian asked again about my past relationships today, read an entry from 2 months before the wedding. I said there was nothing serious, just high school stuff. I hate lying, but I've seen how he talks about impure women. I'm afraid of what would happen if he knew about Michael. It's not worth mentioning. We've been over for years. But Jay wouldn't understand that. A later entry was more alarming. He checked my phone while I was showering. Said he was looking for the time. I'm going to delete all my old messages tonight, just in case. The final entry, dated just 3 days before the wedding, too late to back out now. Mom and Dad have spent so much on this wedding. Julian is a good man, just old-fashioned. I can make this work. I have to. Meanwhile, forensic teams examining Julian's home office found a collection of religious texts and self-published pamphlets. Many contained highlighted passages about female virginity and purity, with Julian's handwritten notes in the margins. One book, The Virtuous Bride, had dozens of annotations, with Julian repeatedly underlining passages about physical signs of purity and tests of virginity. With evidence mounting of Julian's dangerous obsessions, the manhunt intensified. His truck was spotted on a gas station security camera near the Tennessee border the morning after the murder. Law enforcement agencies across 3 states coordinated their search, focusing on hunting areas Julian was known to frequent. The case garnered national media attention. Bride murdered on wedding night headlines splashed across news channels. Commentators debated everything from age-gap relationships to religious extremism, while Lucia's grieving family pleaded for privacy. 8 days into the manhunt, an unexpected development occurred. Julian's estranged son Aaron contacted investigators with dozens of disturbing emails from his father spanning the months before the wedding. My father sent these rants about finding a pure vessel and God's last chance at redemption, Aaron told detectives. I ignored them because he's been unstable for years. I never thought he'd actually hurt someone. The emails revealed Julian's increasing detachment from reality, his fixation on female purity evolving into something more sinister. In the most recent message, sent just days before the wedding, Julian wrote, "When a vessel is contaminated, it must be destroyed. There can be no compromise with sin." Aaron also provided crucial information about a second hunting property Julian owned, one not in his official records. He bought it through a shell company after the divorce. It's completely off-grid, deep in the mountains. He called it his sanctuary from the corrupted world. On the morning of the 10th day, tactical teams surrounded the remote cabin. Inside, they found Julian Westbrook sitting at a wooden table covered with handwritten pages, what he described as his testament of truth. The manifesto was essentially a justification for murder, explained prosecutor Daniel Hayes. Page after page detailing his beliefs about women's deception, the conspiracy of modern society to hide female impurity, and his self-appointed role as judge. Julian surrendered without resistance, his only words upon arrest, "She was just like all the others. None of them are pure." Julian Westbrook's first court appearance stunned the packed courtroom. Rather than appearing remorseful, he stood tall in his orange jumpsuit, addressing the judge with unsettling composure. "I acted in accordance with God's law," he stated during his arraignment. "When a covenant is built on lies, it must be dissolved." The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation before proceeding further. In police custody, Julian provided a full confession, the recording of which would later be played in court. His voice remained eerily calm as he described strangling his bride upon discovering she wasn't a virgin. "When I realized there was no blood, everything became clear," he explained to detectives. "The deception, the manipulation, it was Rebecca all over again. The same betrayal, the same mockery of sacred vows. I could see God's test before me. I had failed once by accepting impurity in my home. I wouldn't fail again." Dr. Eleanor Phillips, the court-appointed psychiatrist, spent over 15 hours evaluating Julian. Her findings presented a complex picture of a man whose rigid religious beliefs had become dangerously entwined with psychological trauma. Mr. Westbrook displays symptoms consistent with PTSD stemming from his first marriage's collapse, Dr. Phillips testified. This trauma fused with his religious ideation, creating a delusional framework where female purity became the ultimate measure of worthiness. However, she emphasized, his condition did not prevent him from understanding the nature or wrongfulness of his actions. District Attorney Sandra Powell built the prosecution's case methodically, presenting Julian's writings as evidence of premeditation rather than momentary passion. This was not a crime of sudden rage, Powell argued, displaying pages from Julian's journals. The defendant had written extensively about tests of purity and consequences for deception. He had contemplated this scenario and predetermined his response. The prosecution introduced Julian's highlighted religious texts, his manifesto, and the emails to his son as evidence of a mind preparing for violence, not spontaneously responding to it. Mr. Westbrook strangled his wife for approximately 4 minutes, Powell reminded the jury. That's 240 seconds during which he could have stopped, during which he made a continuous choice to end Lucia's life. Defense attorney Martin Green pursued a strategy centered on diminished capacity, arguing that Julian's religious delusions and trauma constituted a perfect storm that rendered him unable to form specific intent to kill. "My client exists in an alternate reality shaped by trauma and extreme religious beliefs," Green told the jury. To Julian Westbrook, his actions were not murder but a divine obligation. He cannot be held to the same standard of intent as someone with an unimpaired mind. To support this argument, the defense called Dr. Rachel Montgomery, a religious studies professor specializing in extremist religious movements. "What we see in Mr. Westbrook's writings is consistent with fringe purity movements that adopt religious language to control female sexuality," Dr. Montgomery explained. "These belief systems create a framework where violence becomes justifiable, even necessary, to maintain the believer's worldview." Rebecca Westbrook's testimony proved pivotal for the prosecution. Now remarried and using her maiden name, she described Julian's deteriorating behavior during their marriage. "It started with Bible study, which became Bible obsession," she recalled. "Julian would quiz me about my past, demanding confessions about previous relationships, despite us meeting in high school. When I denied having any, he'd say I was lying, that he could sense my impurity." She described finding Julian testing household items for purity, including checking her underwear for signs of infidelity. "When I finally left, he told our entire church I had been unfaithful, that I was unclean from the beginning." In a particularly moving moment, Michael Keller, Lucia's college boyfriend, testified about their 2-year relationship. "We were just normal college kids," he said, his voice breaking. "We loved each other, respected each other. It ended amicably when I transferred schools. The idea that Lucia died because of our relationship," he couldn't finish the sentence. The most wrenching testimony came from Lucia's parents. Maria Valentini, supported by her husband, addressed the court directly. "My daughter's only crime was loving a man who couldn't love her back," Maria said through tears. "She was kind, honest, hardworking. She kept his secret because she saw his pain and thought she could heal it. Instead, he turned it into a weapon against her." In a surprising development, Julian's pastor, Reverend Thomas Wilson, testified for the prosecution. "I counseled Julian to seek professional help many times," he stated firmly. His views on female purity went far beyond our church's teachings. "When he spoke of Lucia, I worried about his intensity, but I never imagined it would lead to violence. I failed her by not acting more decisively." After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for 11 hours. Their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The jurors later explained they couldn't reach unanimous agreement on the premeditation required for first-degree murder, but all agreed Julian had intentionally killed Lucia. At his sentencing hearing, Julian was offered the chance to speak. Standing rigidly, Bible in hand, he remained unrepentant. "I stand before man's court convicted, but God sees the truth," he declared. "A sacred covenant was desecrated by deception. I regret only that I didn't recognize the signs of corruption sooner." Judge Caroline Matthews sentenced Julian Westbrook to 25 years to life, noting, "The court cannot accept religious belief, no matter how sincerely held, as justification for taking a human life. Ms. Valentini's past was hers alone. It did not diminish her worth, her humanity, or her right to live." As Julian was led away, 2 families sat in silent devastation. The Valentinis huddled together, finding small comfort in justice that couldn't return their daughter. Across the aisle, Julian's sister Catherine wept alone, the sole family member who had attended the entire trial. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca Westbrook embraced Lucia's mother in a moment captured by news cameras. 2 women connected by the same man's dangerous obsessions, one who had escaped, and one who would forever mourn the daughter who didn't. 6 months after Julian Westbrook's sentencing, the Valentini family stood on the steps of Riverdale Community College to announce the establishment of the Lucia Valentini Foundation. With trembling hands but steady voice, Antonio Valentini addressed the gathered crowd. "Our daughter's death exposed a darkness hiding behind religious language," he said. "This foundation will work to prevent other families from experiencing our tragedy by educating young people about the difference between faith and dangerous obsession." The foundation partnered with religious scholars and mental health professionals to create resources identifying when religious teachings cross into extremism, particularly regarding female sexuality and purity culture. Maria Valentini, once reluctant to speak publicly, became the foundation's most powerful advocate. "We were a religious family ourselves," she explained in her first television interview. "Faith should heal, not harm. Faith should unite, not isolate. What killed our daughter wasn't religion. It was the twisting of religion to control and punish." Dr. Samantha Richards, a trauma specialist who consulted on Julian's case, explained how past wounds can transform even positive values into dangerous fixations. "What we saw with Julian Westbrook is something I've observed in many cases," Dr. Richards noted. "Trauma, particularly betrayal trauma, creates a desperate need for control. Traditional values about loyalty and fidelity became weaponized through his unhealed pain. He wasn't seeking religious truth, he was seeking absolute certainty in a world that had shattered his trust." Religious scholars pointed to Julian's case as an extreme example of purity culture's potential dangers. Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, a theologian specializing in gender and religion, explained the historical context. "Many religious traditions contain teachings about sexual purity, but these have often been unevenly applied to women," Dr. Harmon said. "What we call purity culture emerged in the 1990s with a hyperfocus on female virginity as the measure of a woman's worth. While most adherents would never commit violence, this framework can be particularly dangerous when embraced by someone with controlling tendencies or past trauma." The statistics revealed the scope of the problem beyond Julian's individual case. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, women in strictly religious communities with rigid gender roles report domestic violence at rates 30% higher than the general population, though experts note this violence stems from misapplication of religious teachings rather than faith itself. In a surprising development, local religious leaders in Riverdale responded to the tragedy by examining their own messaging. 6 churches formed an interfaith coalition to develop workshops on healthy relationship theology. "We needed to ask ourselves hard questions," said Pastor Sarah Jenkins of New Hope Community Church. "Were we inadvertently promoting ideas that could be misused to control or devalue women? many of us realized we needed to be more careful about how we discuss concepts like purity, submission, and gender roles. Riverdale High School implemented a curriculum developed with the Valentini Foundation addressing religious freedom, healthy relationships, and warning signs of extremism. The program, now adopted by schools in 3 states, carefully distinguishes between personal religious beliefs and dangerous distortions. "We're not criticizing faith," explained school counselor James Peterson. "We're giving students tools to recognize when religious language is being used to control, isolate, or diminish someone's worth, particularly young women who are often targeted by these messages." Each October, on the anniversary of Lucia's death, the community holds a memorial service focusing on healing and positive change. Rather than dwelling solely on the tragedy, the service celebrates steps taken to prevent similar tragedies. Lucia loved helping people, her college roommate Jenna recalled at the most recent service. She would want her story to help others recognize dangerous situations before they escalate. Rabbi David Goldstein, who counsels individuals struggling with religious trauma, offered insight into helping those with unhealthy religious fixations. "The key is determining whether someone's religious practice brings them closer to others or isolates them," Rabbi Goldstein explained. "Healthy faith connects us to community, increases compassion, and promotes growth. When someone uses religion to judge, control, or separate themselves from others, that's a warning sign they need help." The case continues to spark conversation about the persistence of virginity myths in modern America. Despite medical evidence that virginity cannot be physically proven, surveys show nearly 40% of Americans still believe in physical indicators of virginity. These myths have been debunked by medical science for decades, noted Dr. Jennifer Martinez, gynecologist and public health educator. The hymen is a flexible membrane that naturally varies between women and can remain intact after sexual activity or be absent from birth. Yet these misconceptions persist, causing shame and, in extreme cases, like Lucia's, danger. For those experiencing religious trauma or controlling relationships, resources have expanded since Lucia's death. The National Religious Trauma Support Network provides specialized counseling, while the Riverdale Women's Center has trained staff to recognize warning signs of religiously framed control. As this case demonstrates, the line between devout faith and dangerous obsession can be difficult to identify until it's crossed. Julian Westbrook's unhealed trauma transformed traditional religious values into a lethal weapon, while those around him either didn't recognize the warning signs or felt unable to intervene. The tragedy of Lucia Valentini Westbrook reminds us that addressing trauma is as important as addressing extremism. Julian's pain from his first marriage created a vulnerability that religious extremism exploited and amplified. Without proper mental health support, his traditional values about marriage became rigid demands that no real human could satisfy. Lucia's brief life and tragic death now serve as a catalyst for education, prevention, and healing. In Riverdale and beyond, communities are learning to distinguish between faith that uplifts and extremism that destroys, between traditions that honor and obsessions that control.